It is 77% of the fleet. They produce over 50% of the employment. They have a lower fuel to landings ratio than the big demersal sector. They are grounded in local communities for the most part.
I've been almost 30 years fisherman now, and never thought about doing anything other.
I've been fishing for about 30 years.
I work for Orkney Fishermen's Society, which is a cooperative involved in shellfish processing and exporting.
The brown crab fishery is probably one of the biggest species that we have here commercially.
I fish a small 21-foot creel boat out at Plockton for prawns.
I've been fishing most of my adult life. I think I started when I was 15 and left school.
I've been fishing for the last 42 years, working out of Plockton.
We sell the dived scallops from our own vessels, but we also buy langoustine, lobster and crab.
I'm a local fisherman in Pembrokeshire.
So I was small scale and large scale fisherman for off and on for nearly 40 years.
We deal mainly with lobsters, brown crabs, spider crabs, velvets, winkles and shrimps.
I've been fishing since I was 14, which is now 49 years.
I've been fishing at Muddyford for 30 years.
I've been a fisherman for Plymouth for 40 odd years.
All my fishing is with static gear, so lobster pots, nets, cuttlefish traps, and also I do hand lining for bass.
Our members are mostly into shellfish. We have a little bit of whitefish interest, but not a great deal.
You know, I'm the last one to say that all big is bad and all small is beautiful, but at the same time it is shown that 80% of our under 10 metre sector use passive gears. Passive gears do have a lesser impact.
I started on a suction dredger, which is about as high impact as it gets, and I've worked on trawlers, and I couldn't do either of those jobs anymore. I think creel fishing is the future of sustainable inshore fishing, and it's the only kind of fishing I'm interested in, really.
Everything that comes out of the creel, all the juveniles, everything goes back into the sea. It gets its full life. There's absolutely no destruction.
Scallop diving is an extremely low impact and very selective form of fishing, and we cause absolutely no damage to the surrounding marine environment whatsoever.
I mean, I've got a very cheap boat to run. We don't tow any mobile gear, everything's static, and we don't fish much of it.
My own sort of view of things is the lower impact the better, really.
There's a huge amount of people employed inshore, but I don't think their voice is heard.
I feel that recently our voice is being heard somewhat more than it was, but I still don't think that people appreciate the extent of the potential consequences for small-scale fishing communities such as this.
I think most of the big players are in the pelagic sector and demersal sector, and inshore species will be well down that list when it comes to discussing it.
The majority of fishing representation is by SFF, Scottish Fishermen's Federation, who only have their own interest at heart, which is offshore white pelagic fisheries, and the small-scale sustainable fisheries they have no interest in and they give no voice to.
I mean, everybody I speak to thinks that everybody in the fishing industry voted for Brexit, and as I say, nobody I know voted for Brexit, so somebody's misrepresenting certainly the fishermen here, and the prawn creel fishermen on the west coast of Scotland aren't being represented.
When it comes to consulting with the wider fishing industry, I feel that the government perhaps sometimes forgets that a lot of us are remote, a lot of us are in areas with poor internet access. There are still literacy issues within the fishing industry.
And there is a certain kind of fatigue, I think, over the years with consultations where we didn't appear to have had our opinions taken into account. And it's also quite a difficult thing to get under 10 fishermen to meetings when they have to give up some of their income to do so.
If we can remove large beamers especially foreign EU beamers that are bringing us up to our maximum sustainable yields, and we can bring in smaller inshore vessels that are more sustainable, we're in a position where we can allow our stocks to increase to the capacity of where they once were.
I recognise that we don't have the capacity to use take up all the resources we've got in our territorial waters, so it's perfectly valid and legitimate for us to allow the EU fleets to access our waters, but on our own terms.
You know, there's this idea that foreigners come in and catch all of our stuff. Isn't really the problem. The problem is that big guys catch all of the stuff, and so a future fishing industry would be lots of small boats, maybe with a 3-mile limit reinstated or something along that line, so that there was somewhere for the small boats to fish where they weren't competing against large boats.
Because it's no good us having extra quota if the larger boats are taking their quota from the inshore waters as well. So we would like to see some preferential access to the 12 miles. There's a certain amount of problem with gear conflict as well.
The mobile gear does have a place. You know, their market's different to ours, but the two shouldn't be mixed.
They're talking about all sorts of things, from new entrants to a reserve pool, to scientific quota, to auctions of quota, which scares the life out of me, because guess who's going to get that? Sure as hell isn't going to be some poor under 10 guy who lives in a small coastal community.
I would like to hope that some increased opportunity will be there for people who are currently excluded by the current quota system.
Be able to diverse for fishing a little more, so that we can see when there's abundance of stock, closer round Orkney, so that we can change our focus on the seasons, so that we're no overfishing any one species at one time.
Those that are targeting species and have low discards should probably be awarded more quota.
If an infrastructure could be built, you're landing more value into the islands, which would mean more money going into the local economy.
So besides which, we have all our eggs in one basket in terms of shellfish. So prices are up, stocks are good, water's warmer, you know, everybody's happy. But that could all change tomorrow. And if it all does change tomorrow, where can we go? Well, we have nowhere to go because we have no quota.
There would be very little benefit as far as the shellfish are concerned, because we're operating mainly in species where quota doesn't affect us.
Let's just hypothesise and say quota was doubled tomorrow. The guys that have got 90% of the quota are now going to have the same again. The guys that have got 6% of the quota are going to have the same again. It still leaves that disparity. If we took just 2 or 3% of the quota from the big guys and gave it to the wee guys, you would double the quota the wee guys had.
The other side of the coin, which not many people are speaking about, is what happens to those guys who are really reliant on exports.
We sell live, fresh produce to Europe, and without being able to access streamlined freight transport systems, we don't have a market.
Because we deal with the local inshore fisheries, if they put a tariff on, that's directly going to affect the income of the boats.
Because some of the guys say, oh, we can absorb a tariff. Well, you may do if you're making 25–30% profits, which the larger scale fleet is by Seafish's own study figures, but the profit margins for the under 10s are sort of bouncing along on the bottom.
It works two ways. The markets in Europe want to buy fish and shellfish from us, and so they've got as much to lose, and they've got as much interest in there being some kind of reasonably frictionless arrangement.
Worst case scenario, then round here, significant numbers of people will lose their jobs, and a significant amount of income to small communities will vanish.
I think that is something that lands on the doorstep of the government. I think that it's up to them, even if we leave the customs union, to make sure that we have free trade, or that the trade is free flowing.
Really, if we want to take back control, it's not taking it away from the EU, or it's not the EU that's taking it away from us. It's the fisheries managers that are already in this country allowing big boats to fish where little boats fish.
The really good thing about Wales is that everybody knows everybody, so it's a very small industry. So I think we're in a position to carry out really good stakeholder engagement and engage with the fishing industry really well.
You need an overarching policy for the UK, but then you need sort of more localised management.
It would just be a much better operation if we did have the ability to have more regional management control.
Well, I think it would be a cooperative for all the fishing folk around about Orkney. It would be an association so that everybody had a voice. The scientists had a voice, the fishermen had a voice.
Where local management groups exist and there are regional inshore fisheries groups in Scotland, then I think these groups are the best vehicle for delivering effective inshore management, which should be based on robust science where possible and collective decision making with the fishermen at the centre of the process.
You need this sort of multitudinous approach, that there's no one given design for fishery management.
One size doesn't fit all. In fact, one size probably doesn't fit a 30-mile stretch of coastline.
From our time in these case study ports, it became clear that Brexit will impact different sections of the UK fishing fleet differently. But for the low-impact fishers we spoke to, a couple clear priorities emerged. First, new and existing quotas should be allocated in a fair and sustainable manner so that all fishers can earn a living from the resource. Second, as fish is a live and perishable product, it's important that smooth market access to the EU remains. And third, that when it comes to decision making, we should be looking beyond Westminster into fishing communities themselves to make decisions about the resource that impacts them. We don't often hear from fishers, and when we do, it's the big organizations with loud voices and deep pockets. With the new fisheries legislation, now is the critical moment to change this fact and have a fair and sustainable fishing system for all.